There's a house in Wisconsin sitting on top of a 60-foot rock filled with mannequins and a mechanical sea creature bigger than a school bus. There's a hillside in Connecticut where a 56-foot cross still glows over a crumbling replica of Bethlehem. There's a spot in the Bronx where a miniature United States once burned down its own Chicago on purpose every single night. None of this is fiction. These are real places, and people paid money to visit every one of them. Today we're counting down 5 of the strangest attractions that ever existed in America. Places so bizarre they sound made up, but every single one was real. Number 5 takes us to Spring Green, Wisconsin, to a house that shouldn't exist. It sits on top of a natural sandstone chimney called Deer Shelter Rock, 60 feet up, with nothing underneath it but stone and air. This is the house on the rock, built by a man with no architecture training, no blueprint, and apparently no plan to ever stop building. His name was Alex Jordan Jr., and in the 1940s he started hauling lumber and stone up onto that rock just to build himself a weekend retreat. In 1959 he opened it to the public, and once the money started coming in, he never really stopped building. Room after room, collection after collection. A popular story claims Jordan built the place out of spite to get back at Frank Lloyd Wright, whose studio sat down the same valley, but most historians say the two men likely never even met. The real story is stranger than the myth anyway. Jordan filled the house with thousands of dolls, antique guns, rooms of mannequins with wings, a mechanical orchestra that plays itself, and an infinity room stretching 218 feet out over the valley, held up by steel alone, lined with over 3,000 windows staring down into open air. He kept building until his death in 1989, and his final request was to have his ashes scattered over the very rock he built his life on top of. The house on the rock is still standing today, still open, still almost impossible to describe to someone who hasn't walked through it. But a strange house on a rock is nothing compared to what happened next in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas. Number 4 isn't about one man's imagination. It's about an entire comic strip brought to life. In 1968, in Marble Falls, Arkansas, an old trout farm was turned into a full theme park based on Lyle Abner, a newspaper comic strip about a fictional backwoods town called Dog Patch, full of exaggerated hillbilly characters. Somebody decided the town should exist in real life, in the middle of the actual Ozarks. For a while, it worked. Visitors rode a roller coaster called Earthquake Magoon's Brain Rattler, fished in a real trout stream running through the park, and fed garbage by hand to mechanical pigs and hogs standing in for trash cans, with signs claiming the animals gets hungry too. Costumed characters wandered the grounds as Lil Abner, Daisy Mae, and Mammy and Pappy Joachim, and at its peak Dog Patch pulled in close to 1 million visitors a year. But the comic strip that inspired the park ended in 1977, and an entire generation of kids grew up with no idea who these characters were. Add in the 1970s energy crisis and a failed ski resort next door, and Dog Patch started bleeding out. It changed owners in 1981, again in 1987, and in October of 1993, after 25 strange years, closed for good. The rides were left in the woods to rust, and the wooden frame of that old roller coaster still peaks above the tree line today, a forest slowly swallowing what used to be a comic strip come to life. Dog Patch was built around hillbillies, Number 3 was built around the Bible, and it might be the strangest labor of love on this list. In Waterbury, Connecticut, a Catholic attorney named John Baptist Greco spent much of his life wanting to become a priest. Poor health kept him out of the seminary, so he found another way to spread his faith. Starting in the mid-1950s, Greco began building his own version of the Holy Land on top of Pine Hill using whatever he could scavenge: chicken wire, plaster, plywood, even old bathtubs turned into biblical scenery. He built a scale replica of Bethlehem, a Garden of Eden, a walk-through version of the Roman catacombs, and a tiny inn near Nativity Square, complete with its own no vacancy sign. Crowning the hilltop was a 56-foot illuminated cross, visible for miles along the interstate, beside giant letters spelling out Holy Land, U.S.A., modeled after the Hollywood sign. At its height, the site pulled in around 40,000 visitors a year, and truck drivers said they'd offer a quiet prayer just from glimpsing that glowing cross as they passed. But as Greco aged and his health failed, he was forced to close it in 1984, intending to reopen after renovations that never came. He died 2 years later, leaving the site to a small order of nuns with no money to maintain it. Vandals moved in, statues were beheaded, and weeds swallowed entire biblical villages whole. For decades it sat as an eerie ruin, until a local mayor bought the property in 2013 and slowly began bringing it back. If Holy Land, U.S.A. was built by one devoted man with scavenged materials, number 2 was built by a man who had actually helped create Disneyland with $65 million behind him. His name was C.V. Wood, and after a falling out with Walt Disney's brother, he set out to build his own 85-acre theme park, shaped literally like a map of the United States, in the Baychester section of the Bronx. He called it Freedom Land, U.S.A., and when it opened on Father's Day of 1960, people immediately nicknamed it the Disneyland of the East. Visitors rode a stagecoach through a staged Civil War battlefield with real cannon fire, floated down a river recreating Lewis and Clark's journey, and every single night watched actors reenact the Great Chicago Fire, an entire miniature Chicago rebuilt just to be burned to the ground in front of paying crowds. In its first summer, Freedom Land drew an astonishing 1.5 million visitors. It should have been the East Coast's answer to Disneyland for decades. Instead, it barely lasted 4 years. The construction costs buried it in debt almost immediately, and rather than fix the problem, owners kept bolting on new attractions, chasing quick cash. Then, in November 1963, President Kennedy was assassinated, and almost overnight, the appetite for squeaky clean patriotic entertainment seemed to disappear. Attendance collapsed, parts of the park were sold off, and by September 1964, Freedom Land filed for bankruptcy and closed for good, torn down so completely that today almost nothing remains except a single historical marker standing where a giant theme park once burned down its own Chicago night after night. Which brings us to number 1, the one you've almost certainly seen without ever knowing the full story. If you've driven through the American South or Midwest and spotted a weathered barn roof painted in bold white letters reading Sea Rock City, you've already met this legend. It started in 1932 when miniature golf entrepreneur Garnet Carter and his wife Frida opened a 10-acre rock garden atop Lookout Mountain near Chattanooga, Tennessee, full of massive stone formations and a lookout point, claiming you could see 7 states from one spot. The problem was almost nobody showed up. The Great Depression had crushed rural tourism, so Carter hired a young self-taught sign painter named Clark Byers, gave him a truck, a ladder, and buckets of paint, and sent him onto the back roads. Byers' job was simple and a little insane. Find farmers with barns visible from the highway and convince them to let him paint a giant advertisement onto the roof, free, in exchange for lifetime passes to Rock City. For the next 3 decades, Byers crisscrossed 19 states, dodging bulls and lightning strikes, painting the same 3 words again and again. By the time he retired in 1969, he had personally painted over 900 barns, turning 3 words into one of the most recognizable slogans in American roadside history. So well known that soldiers reportedly spotted the same phrase painted on a supply store all the way in Vietnam. Highway beautification laws in the 1960s forced most barns to be painted over, and today fewer than 100 survive. But Rock City itself never closed. It's still open right now, still pulling visitors up Lookout Mountain, all because one man spent 30 years climbing onto strangers' roofs with a paintbrush and an idea that just wouldn't fade. 5 attractions, 5 completely different visions of what America could build. A house with no blueprint, a comic strip brought to life in the Ozarks, a Bible story built from bathtubs and chicken wire, a Disneyland rival that burned its own Chicago to the ground every night, and a rock garden saved by 900 barn roofs. Some of these places are gone forever. Torn down, bankrupt, left to rot quietly in the woods. Some are still standing right now, worn around the edges, waiting for someone to walk through them again. But everyone started the same way. Somebody looked at empty land, or a comic strip, or a pile of rock, or a childhood dream, and decided it was worth building anyway, even when nobody was sure it would work. And for a while, in every single case, it worked. So the next time you're driving down some forgotten American highway and spot a faded barn roof or a rusted gate half swallowed by trees, slow down and take a second look. You never know which forgotten piece of America you might be passing by.